communication. We are always trying to improve our procedures and operations, so our employees are welcome to participate in professional development programs. Our judges and other employees participate in various events such as scientific conferences, webinars, and roundtables to exchange their experience. We are really interested in feedback which we may receive from the attendees. That's why we continuously survey them. During the full-scale invasion, our members, some of our members, have joined the armed forces of Ukraine. We delivered 139 verdicts of this time. And in 15 cases, the defendants were found innocent. We cannot say that whether it's a lot or not, but I can state that all cases of the court are characterized by the highest grade of difficulties. The first instance court currently reviews over 250 criminal proceedings. Over 600 people have been involved, and HACC is ensuring objective and fair justice. The main goal is to bring the perpetrators to justice in a proportional manner. Another goal is to avoid wrongful doing from the side of the court. Besides, the judges, court assistants, experts, and secretaries demonstrate a human-oriented attitude and respect, irrespective of the participant's position. Over the past period, we have witnessed significant legislative changes that expand the court's operations. The court currently is able to review administrative and civil cases. It can also impose administrative sanctions confined to forfeiture of property to the state budget. The court has been implementing new approaches and practices which contributed to some of our achievements we can be proud of. At the same time, we are facing new challenges, but we are ready to them. The Higher Anti-Corruption Court is just at the start of its journey. It's the youngest court in Ukraine. Nonetheless, its role cannot be overestimated. It contributes to the rule of law in the country. And I'm very glad to welcome you at this event, and I'm happy to hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Alexander Semelnikov, who is the head of the Appellate Chamber. Good morning, dear participants. On behalf of the Appellate Chamber, I'm happy to welcome all of you. Today we are celebrating the 4th anniversary of the court's operations. Maybe you mentioned during the video that I was talking about separate premises important for the court. It's a very important challenge. As regards to the achievements, I would like to emphasize the objective justice processes run at the Appellate Chamber. Not a single person can blame an Appellate Chamber member for being partial or for taking sides with some of the participants. The verdicts are delivered on the basis of the court consideration, case consideration. announcements, expectations, and publications have no impact on the hearing outcomes. The appellate chamber, however, faces some challenges posed by the legislation itself. And one of the challenges is the organization development of the appellate chamber. Appellate chamber is a unique institution. It's the first case when some court, together with the first instance court, is under the umbrella of another court. Then the position of the appellate chamber head is an administrative position. At the same time, the head does not have all immanent functions. The appellate chamber was established upon the recommendation of the Venice Commission. According to this recommendation, the appellate chamber should exist and operate in full with all the organizational prerequisites. Of course, there are some issues in our activity. However, we are trying to find the solutions. It is important to talk about these issues, and I am sure that by joint efforts we will succeed. However, this is an experiment, and this experiment proves that some problems really should be addressed. The appellate chamber, just like the first instance court, have proved that they are efficient. Once again, I would like to congratulate you on this occasion. Thank you. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Stanislav Kravchenko, the head of the Supreme Court of Ukraine. Good morning, dear colleagues. First and foremost, I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Supreme Court of Ukraine. Today, in the morning, I have had some conversations with the participants. We really wondered how much time has elapsed since the time we set up the anti-corruption court. At that time, there were lots of discussions at the political level. We tried to decide whether we really need this court or not. But actually now, all these conversations, these discussions are in the past. Since that time, our state made unprecedented efforts to select the judges and launch the court. Now the court is in full operation. I'm recalling the first period of its activity. We realized that after the inceptional period, it was time to unfold the operations. And nowadays, no one can doubt the efficiency of the HACC. It's a full-fledged member of the judiciary system and works with continuous efficiency. Now let's discuss the challenges. Of course, the greatest challenge is the war which started on the 24th of February 2022. So the judiciary is not an exception. We know that lots of crimes are being committed against the national security. Now we witness new categories of cases we have never heard before of, like collaborationists and so on. But anyway, the main threat is the threat for our sovereignty and independence. We realized that it was time to change our ways. We had to complete our corruption cases. And afterwards, we realized that new cases emerge, like evasion from military service, corruption in the area of humanitarian aid distribution. Then there was a case with the Ministry of Defense, and so on and so on. So the problems have been accumulating and aggravating. Unfortunately, we have to state that the problem of corruption is present even in courts themselves. But of course, we should not be idle, we shouldn't give up, we should fight in our sector. The anti-corruption court plays an important role in the system, and in my opinion, shared by many other people, it is efficient in its activities. I'm deeply convinced that we will succeed. However, we should also keep in mind that the war will be over someday. There is nothing eternal, and of course our country will need the international support like never before. Using this opportunity, I would like to extend my gratitude to all stakeholders, to the government of Ukraine, to people and the government of the US, to the government and peoples of the European Union. Many thanks for the support we've been enjoying till now. But in the future, we will need even more support, otherwise it will be too difficult to cope. We need not just political, but also economic support. We will need to protect our investments. And definitely other jurisdictions will be involved, like commercial courts or administrative courts. On the background of war, many civilians claim against the state. Unfortunately, there are many cases like this, so we have to decide in what way we could reduce the number of such cases. It would be a political measure as well. So the role of the courts, including the anti-corruption court, will be decisive. As regards to the HSCC, the state court administration and the higher Council of Justice made a decision on the number of the HSCC judges. So we had to select 12 judges. There are 12 positions in the court. Many judges entered our court having left the criminal justice system, so this was a valuable resource for us. Nearly all judges became the members of the third court chamber, and they have become the specialized anti-corruption court. This is actually the top of the court vertical. So this means that our court, Supreme Court, has also participated in setting up the HSCC. Definitely there are some issues, some of them were mentioned by the head of the appellate chamber. It would be a miracle if there were no problems, of course. We would like to commend the initiatives of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU. NABU is striving for transferring some of their cases to HSCC. It means an increase of the workload. However, the court, the HSCC, often does not differentiate between the criminal cases and the corruption cases. But how can we cope with this workload?
штат.
Yes, this is a relevant question for today, so we have to think about increasing the number of judges. It will be justified, of course. We have a huge country, we have a lot of challenges, and I hope that using this opportunity and having so many important guests in this hall, I would call to support this initiative on increasing the number of judges of HACC. And I'm sure that if we are going to work in cooperation, and we already have a general understanding what should we do, for these 4 years we have already a lot of experience, I'm sure that we will succeed. I wish you all a successful day. I wish you all to listen to each other and to get out of this hall with a clear understanding on how should we proceed for the future. Thank you. Thank you, Stanislav Ivanovich, and I would like to invite Kevin Kober, Deputy Chief of Mission, U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, to do the welcoming word.
Доброго ранку, шановні.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, judges, colleagues, ambassadors, diplomats, friends. I have an honor to represent the USA today because this is a very important day, not only for the High Anti-Corruption Court, but also we have to acknowledge that this is an important and remarkable day. This is not only 4 years of existence of an independent HACC. This is a remarkable issue for the independence of Ukraine. This is an important tool to support Ukrainian independence. I'm very happy to celebrate this event together with you and to note that too. If you allow me, I will proceed in English. It will be easier for me.
Justice Mihalenko. Дякую. Мабуть, це все. Я можу.
Looks like it's all. I can go.
Semennikov, Judge Kravchenko, Judge Hamzin, and dear friends and colleagues. At the time of its inception in 2019, President Zelensky defined the mission of the High Anti-Corruption Court to ensure that corrupt officials face the consequences of their actions, and in doing so, safeguard the interests of the state, society, and investors. Today, this mission is more critical than ever, and I applaud Ukraine's continued commitment to advancing anti-corruption efforts, even amid Russia's full-scale invasion. The court's work to deliver justice is essential to securing Ukraine's prosperous future, a democratic government grounded in the rule of law, driven by transparency, and integrated with Europe. In support of President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people's commitment to fight corruption, the United States government hosted Chief Justice Mihalenko, as well as delegation members from NABU and SAPO, for meetings in Washington just last week. Discussions focused on shared challenges and how the United States justice system works collaboratively to address corruption issues. Their visit demonstrates the ongoing U.S. commitment to strengthen the independence and capacity of Ukraine's anti-corruption institutions, which are critical to Ukraine's future. The work ahead will build on the achievements of the first 4 years of the court's operations, including handing down over 100 convictions that held corrupt judges, prosecutors, parliamentarians, and others to account. I know that the court faces resource and capacity challenges. Its workload is immense and growing. The path forward requires strategic vision and a systematic approach to corruption cases. To effectively target high-level corruption and deliver justice, it is critical for the court to prioritize efforts and cooperate with other independent anti-corruption bodies. As President Zelensky has highlighted, winning the war against Russia's full-scale invasion is the first victory. But the second victory will be a victory over corruption. True peace can only be guaranteed if Ukraine is a country grounded in the rule of law, free from corruption, and fully integrated into Europe. Eliminating corruption is important to attract investors, maintain donor confidence, and drive Ukraine's recovery and prosperity. Thank you again, Chief Justice Mikhailenko and colleagues, for the chance to be here today and the opportunity to talk about the important role of the High Anti-Corruption Court to address corruption and deliver justice for Ukrainians. Дякуємо за увагу. Слава Україні!
Thank you very much for your attention. Glory to Ukraine. Thank you very much, Kevin. And now I'd like to give the floor to Remy Duflo, Deputy Head of the EU Delegation to Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, good morning. I will switch into English now.
The European Union. I would like to extend my warm welcome to all of you, to all the participants of this 4th anniversary meeting of the High Anti-Corruption Court. And I want, of course, to thank a lot the organizers and Mrs. Vera in particular. It is a privilege to share the floor with our distinguished partners from the High Anti-Corruption Court and from the judicial system, the Supreme Court in particular, and with my colleagues representing the US Embassy or the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative here present. It's no secret that corruption has crippled this country for decades. And as Mr. Kravchenko recalled us, unfortunately it's still the case, even at the highest levels of the judicial system. The revolution of dignity marked a turning point in that process when Ukraine took bold steps by creating a legal framework and establishing anti-corruption institutions tasked with preventing and repressing corruption, and in particular high-level cases. The European Union has encouraged and supported this effort since the beginning, and we are proud of the achieved results. And thank you to judges here present and to also their staff, the apparatus of courts in particular, despite extremely challenging circumstances and financial situation, for the results that they have collectively achieved. The High Anti-Corruption Court was the latest of the institutions set up after the Revolution of Dignity in 2019, I remember I was here, as the main court for adjudicating high-level corruption cases investigated and prosecuted by NABU and SAPO, respectively. It became operational following a selection of 39 judges with the engagement of the Public Council of International Experts, which the European Union contributed to. Meaningful involvement of international experts in that selection process made it transparent and credible, and it was a success. Despite the full-fledged Russian aggression that started 560 days ago, progress has continued, but a lot remains to be done to entrench those achievements in society and in the Ukrainian institutional landscape over time. Fighting corruption is indeed a long stretch, and it has to remain a top priority all the way long, and this despite, or rather because, of the new context faced by Ukraine. Fight a war of aggression and counter-predatory operations related to Russian interests, while at the same time implementing very ambitious reforms on many fronts to pursue, and I hope achieve as soon as possible, the country's historic path towards joining the European Union. The results are already visible. Between 2020 and 2022, the High Anti-Corruption Court adjudicated hundreds of cases of corruption offenses concerning a growing number of high-level individuals, 106 in 2021, 107 in 2021, 132 in 2022, and available data say that already 58 indictments, so that 247 persons were sent to the Anti-Corruption Court in the first half of 2023, this year. This is double the figure of the previous years. So those cases concern prominent public officials, including former deputy ministers, former parliamentarians, and high-level judges. I think we have one recent case, Mr. Kravchenko referred to it, that offer a sounding example of the performance and determination of Ukraine's anti-corruption system. And yet, popular levels of corruption perception and experience remain very high, while society's tolerance for corruption is decreasing. Various vested interests relentlessly try to undermine the anti-corruption system and roll back the the reforms. The anti-corruption framework needs to further build its capacity. For instance, NABU needs many more staff and forensic expertise, and we know what else as well, while SAPO keeps struggling to operate within its autonomy and internal capacity. As for the Anti-Corruption Court, it faces an increasing caseload, partly due to the expansion of its mandate to cover civil confiscation of related to Russian assets. And as Mr. Kravchenko underlined, sorry, I keep referring to you, selection and appointment of new judges with the involvement of the Public Council of International Experts should remain a priority and should be pursued as a priority now. And I would like to launch the same call to decision makers and members of parliament in particular in support of this expansion. The Criminal Procedure Code, beside this, also needs to be amended to allow certain cases to be adjudicated in single judge composition. From the very beginning of Ukraine's transformation efforts, the European Union has been the trusted and supporting partner of Ukraine. We actively supported, in particular, the creation of the anti-corruption institutions and of the High Anti-Corruption Court in particular, providing major political, technical, and financial support, especially via the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative, and we will continue to do so. We are currently finalizing the formulation of the third phase of that project, with a very substantial budget to which the EU and Denmark are both contributing substantially. Denmark, which has been championing the implementation of this flagship program since the beginning. And thanks to this very, maybe small, but very active member state. This renewed support, which will provide top-level expertise to help bring about the further and much-needed changes, is a renewed demonstration of our genuine commitment to Ukraine's anti-corruption drive. For the High Anti-Corruption Court to meet the expectations associated with its expanding mandate, further reform, further improvement will be needed, and this will require the continued leadership and commitment of all. As European Union, we count on your cooperation and shall stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, until and beyond Ukrainian victory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and now I'd like to give the floor to Alan Bach-Christensen, the head of the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative. Over to you.
Good morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And first of all, congratulations to the High Anti-Corruption Court. 4 years, that is no age for a court. And while the court is still very young, its performance is mature and professional. And that's despite growing up in times of COVID, in times of war. I remember the days in 2018 where I was organizing the Ukraine Reform Conference in Copenhagen. And just a few days before, the Parliament decided to establish the Anti-Corruption Court. That was the best scenario we could expect for our conference in Copenhagen. And while we all had very high hopes at that time, I think no one really knew what to expect from this decision. But now we know. The court has become the best example of how to deliver justice in Ukraine. Gone are the days where a court decision was known in advance. Gone are the days where high-level officials had impunity in Ukraine. We have been working with the court. Even before it was established, we assisted in the selection of the judges. We assisted in setting up the court as such, as a structure. And since its establishment, we have been providing capacity building, training of staff, IT tools, the best international expertise to guide the court in its work. But the court became successful not because of us, but because of its extremely dedicated, committed, and professional staff. The judges, the apparatus, under the leadership of first the court president Tanishevich, and later on the president Mykolenko, who is with us here today. You all deserve a lot of praise for all your efforts in making the court a success. An example of your dedication, the fact that the court never stopped working, even during the darkest days of February and March last year. The court continues its work, and we continue to believe in you. We provided equipment and support so that the court could continue functioning even during those days. So while so much has been achieved already, there's still room for improvements. We know that the court needs more judges. We know that the appeals chamber need better premises. We know that the efficiency of the court can be improved with some legal changes that we are looking forward to. And the e-case, the case management system needs to be digitalized so that the court can continue being the most modern court of Ukraine. When the court at the age of 4 has already achieved so much, I can only think about what lies ahead when we are going to celebrate the next many anniversaries, when we are going to celebrate Ukraine's victory and membership of the European Union. I wish the court all the best in its future. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much for your welcoming words. And now I would like to invite the participants of the first panel discussion and its moderator, the judge of HACC, Timur Hamzin.
Добре. Запрошую, будь ласка.
I'd like to invite the participants of the first panel, Микола Хавранюк, Станіслав Кравченко, Андрій Костін, Денис Маслов. Well, so 4 years ago we started to administer justice. These 4 years passed very quickly. For this time we have faced many challenges. Of course, it was a huge load, COVID pandemic, full-scale invasion. For all this time, we made a transition from criminal cases to administrative cases. We encompassed them into our activities. As judges, we had to accommodate ourselves to these conditions and to these circumstances. We had to develop ourselves all the time, and we do that. We continue to do that, and we will continue doing that for the future. So we became professionals, and as it was already mentioned, for 4 last years, this is quite a term for any institution, we have managed to find our designated place in the justice system of Ukraine, and the role of the court in this system is going to be discussed now during this panel.
So, our first question will be addressed to the representative of legislative branch of power, Mr. Denis Maslov, the head of the Committee on Legal Policy and Justice of the Верховна Rada. In your opinion, has HACC occupied its right place within the justice system? Thank you very much for this question. First of all, I would like to welcome all members of HACC, all employees of the court, and generally all Ukrainians with the 4th anniversary of HACC. Let me answer your question about the role and place of HACC. I would like to say that given the president's standpoint, who has zero tolerance to corruption, and given the second front line inside the country, that's the anti-corruption activities, we can say that the higher anti-corruption court is not just a part of a justice system, it's the integral part of our anti-corruption system. That's why you, the court employees, the judges, have been entrusted with a very important mission, because you are fighting on this second front line inside the country, because these anti-corruption measures have an impact on the survival of our country on the whole. First, you had to deal with the criminal cases only. Then the civil and administrative cases added to your jurisdiction. And now you really have to consider a big deal of cases. Both Ukrainians and international partners have trust with your operations. And you are the court that considers cases related to asset received by corrupt activities. So the court enjoys both internal and external trust. The court decisions have an important role in terms of Ukrainian future. Ukraine will be able also to present its position in the European Court of Justice and the Human Rights Court. Therefore, our HACC has been really entrusted with multiple functions, including the cases related to assets. I'm the head of the Committee on the Legal Policy, and previously HACC participated our meetings just once a year when it had to share the HACC position on some pieces of legislation. So generally they were not our frequent guests. But since the start of the full-scale invasion, the HACC has started regular visits to our committee, so our meetings have become more frequent and regular. HACC participates in a discussion of certain pieces of legislation related to sanctions, assets, and register of sanctions. Here I would like to thank all judges of HACC who participated in the development of the respective draft law, and my personal thanks goes to Ms. Vera, who was an advocate of this draft law. Also, many thanks to all other involved persons. So briefly, I would answer to your question with resolute yes. you have an important place and role, and you have many friends among our committee. Thank you. Thank you very much for this reply, and on my own behalf, I can confirm that the recent amendments made to the legislation are really important for our court. So, you are the member of the higher instance. You receive the cases after the first instance court and after the appellate chamber. So could you please tell the general audience a little bit more about the specific nature of the cases we consider? Unfortunately, the microphone doesn't function. Thanks. As mentioned before, the Supreme Court is the third cassation instance for the higher anti-corruption court in its decision. Previously, we used to deal with the criminal cases only. However, at present, we also consider such topic as a special confiscation. It's a new topic for us. Now we are talking about the forfeiture of assets. It's a legislative novelty. We have not analyzed the bulk of cases yet, but I think we should conduct a comprehensive analysis. Definitely there are some issues that should be addressed, but if we find a solution, we will improve the situation in the country on the whole when we adopt a new and different approaches. But generally, I can say that we have expanded our activities. We have a very clear-cut goal. We aim at considering cases related to anti-corruption sector. And after the HSCC judges had been selected, the lawmaker made some amendments to the law on jurisdiction of HSCC, because previously the cases used to be investigated by NABU, and then they were forwarded to the anti-corruption prosecutor's office. But we had to develop a new approach. Our anti-corruption court was guided by the criminal code, so the anti-corruption chamber deals with all articles from the criminal code which can be recognized as corruption-related articles. So we managed to develop our own approaches. I cannot say that this work is complete. It would be illogical to say so, because the bulk of work is really huge and the new legal relations emerge. The situation in the country is unstable, and the anti-corruption sector experiences multiple changes. But generally, we can assess our work in a positive manner. Of course, some of the decisions have been contested and appealed, but of course it is possible. That's what the Chamber of Appeal exists for. The cassation instance also had to nullify some of the decisions. It is not possible to work otherwise. Some time ago, such situations were extraordinary. They nearly did not exist at all. But let's see it in the following way. The cassation decisions are the test for the work of the process and proceeding itself. So that's why, even though the non-guilty decisions were delivered, this is the proof of the system's functionality. So the criminal and the procedural code actually has the provisions that regulate the activities of the court's instances. We are living at a difficult time. However, we got some legislative amendments. The article number 615 was amended in order to simplify the process to a certain extent in the first days of war. But anyway, I would like to emphasize here that however difficult the situation is, however tough work awaits us, nonetheless, our decisions are important and they have to be recognized as fair and just all across the globe, and they will be recognized as objective only when they are delivered with due considerations of all standards and requirements. And all the proceeding participants should be treated fairly and in line with the standards. So our courts will be recognized globally only if we meet the high standards. I think that nobody here can doubt sticking to the standards by the HACC. These standards are of high quality, and so I would like to thank all of you for your efforts, especially these difficult times, and I think that we will succeed and cope with any difficult task. Thank you. Thank you very much for this positive feedback. Personally, I first met Mykola Ivanovich during training sessions. It was at the time when the judges to the HSCC were selected. He was our trainer. His topic was some aspects of the criminal law. And he is a researcher, an expert. So the question to you is as follows. What were expectations 4 years ago, and what are the expectations at the moment, and did the hopes come true? Good morning, dear participants, dear judges. Congratulations on this anniversary. It's a festive day. I will explain why it's a festive day. Actually, we met a little bit earlier, not just during the training, because it was me who developed the written part of the exam offered to the HSCC candidates. This written assignment was really complicated. However, the candidates did not fail. I'll offer you a small story. I've been participating in anti-corruption activities since 1995. I was a member of the working group developing the first law, anti-corruption law. It was the first precedent in the post-Soviet period. It was just start was a little bit chaotic. Nonetheless, of course, we drafted this law. The corruption accompanied us throughout all years of our independence. Good guys fought evil guys, and for some reason, evil guys often managed to succeed. Since 2000, it's become evident that we needed to create a real anti-corruption infrastructure. However, at the time of Yanukovych presidency, anti-corruption infrastructure had some artificial nature, so it looked like a real thing, but in fact it was a toy. But after the Revolution of Dignity, we felt the real inspiration. In 2014, we got the anti-corruption law, then the law on NABU, and then the NABU was established, and we got the law on anti-corruption prosecutor's office, upon which the office was actually established. Then many laws based on the Anti-Corruption Convention followed. Despite all these efforts, the mechanism did not function properly. All of these initiatives were intended to pave way for further progress. Maybe you remember the situation when the first and second convocation of NACP, National Corruption Prevention Agency, did not function. NABU and Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office had multiple arguments, and the number of cases completed was really small. It was like 8 cases per year. It was not possible to make this mechanism moving. And then we faced with an idea to develop anti-corruption court to make this mechanism move with all heartiness. So what are the current achievements? First and foremost, the court is able to focus on the top priorities to achieve the ultimate results with the limited resources. Then the next benefit, the next achievement is the integrity. And number 3 is professionalism. It was actually the reason for stringent requirements applied to the candidates. And the assignments which you completed prove the level of your professionalism. Of course, we can never get rid of all challenges, and the first challenge is related to the criminal and procedural legislation. It is over-regulated, I would say. Now, I'm envious with many countries where the judges can decide on the procedure themselves if they are guided by the main principles, but we have to wait for the lawmaker to offer all kinds of regulations. Many problems appeared after the so-called Lozovый amendments. There are real collisions between the criminal and criminal procedural codes. For instance, the criminal code has some set limits for investigation, but the criminal and procedural code has other provisions. It's a collision which has to be somehow addressed. Then the procedural rights are sometimes abused, and the participants fail to meet the procedural obligations. Therefore, the judges often become so-called hostages of the procedure. The pre-trial investigation authorities and the prosecutors have some duplication with the investigators. But actually, it's due to some problems with the law on the prosecutor's office, so it is not clear what the functions are imminent for the prosecutors.
We have quite significant problems with expert activities and so on. So if we look at the criminal code of Ukraine, again, the more years passing, the more challenges we see, which are clearly described by scientists. So the first thing, why do we fight? Why we have identified that only these acts are corruption? Why don't we treat as a corruption contributing large amounts of cash to political parties' funds? Why don't we treat it like that? Why don't we treat as a corruption the use of insider information in insider trading by different officials and so on and so on? There are quite a lot of such articles in the Criminal Code of Ukraine. We, in my opinion, are quite limited in our understanding what is the corruption. Also, lawyers are now discussing the Article 364. 10 years ago, we had 1,000 convicted according to this Article 364. Last year, we had less than 10 persons convicted. Why? Because the article doesn't work. Why? Because it was amended, and also we often face a challenge and doubt what is substantial damage, what are the consequences, and actually the HACC has 3 different judgments on this matter, which are rather different, and we don't have a single vision what is the underlying reason for that. So we are, so to say, in a dead end in this regard, and there are a lot of other problems. I like to mention also the challenge with the number of judges. We are eagerly waiting for the Higher Attestation Commission to start operating, so we will be able to fill in the needed positions. Yes, the situations create a lot of challenges, and we will have more coming because we are, generally speaking, in the middle of our war. We will liberate our territories in the future, and we will need a lot of resources from the judiciary and law enforcement agencies to solve the problems which may be found on their territories. Look at Crimea. This is quite a large territory. We also, of course, expect for humanitarian support and for support from the EU. Yes, we do that, but we will face much more challenges. We will have elections, maybe 2024 or later, but we will have them in any case in the future, and all the problems in the society will become even more complicated. But in any case, we will handle all of that. We will solve them. The only issue that HACC exists and operates, and the number of cases which is growing, demonstrates us that the HACC is a transparent system, especially comparing to other courts. We know that judges who are working in this court are working with integrity, so let's believe in victory of our country. That's all from me. Thank you. Thank you. It was quite a global response. I have to admit, I have a question to the Prosecutor General. In your opinion, what is the role of the HACC today, and as to the expectations of society? Were they met? Different representatives of different authorities in terms of expectations to this authority, have they met? Thank you for that question. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude for inviting me here today and for giving me an opportunity to participate. This is a celebration, and even despite the war, we have to celebrate each and every small victory, because the big victory consists of smaller ones. So 4 years of successful operation of higher anti-corruption court is a success and is a victory. You refer to me as to the Prosecutor General, but I'd like to remind you that before 3 years, I was a head of the same committee as Denises, and for me personally, HACC started its operation from the beginning of the period of powers of this existing parliament. So we've been developing together. It's important to remember. So how the society perceives that? The society, law enforcement agencies, you know, in our country, a lot of institutions, and it's a long-standing practice. They operate in a disbalance between facts and the perception of the society. Sometimes society perceives everything even better than it is in real, and I see it now. Unfortunately, it makes me sad. Stanislav Ivanovich mentioned some of these institutions already and has a welcoming word. There are institutions which work is perceived much worse comparing to their achievements, and this is actually a question to specific media and the angle of their coverage. And with this stable attitude that all policemen, MPs, judges, they're all corrupt, they're lacking integrity, you know that this thought is widespread in the society. But I'd like to make a call to all the colleagues from the anti-corruption court that the facts about your work and the perception from the society of your achievements, they are aligned. And this is a unique situation because higher anti-corruption court is open to the society, and even if you are open to it, you are not a media institution. Maybe I'm using this in not a very nice context, but you are maintaining this balance between openness and not advertising yourself and your work and activities. It is very important. Why? For me, your role, and it was mentioned already for many times, I really agree with most of the facts mentioned. I have a lot of my personal reflections regarding specific positions which were mentioned related to different issues, but in my opinion, from my point of view, the main thing is that you are so to say country forming or society forming pilot. You are a pilot of that how should look judiciary in general. And this is actually something I'd like to wish to all of you, the Society of Judges of Higher Anti-Corruption Court, to remember about, because we all have a lot of everyday work. This is our function. We perform it and we have to perform it. But we still have to remember that higher specialized intellectual property rights court is on agenda, or the court which is going to review cases in the same status on, for example, the cases related to investors and protection of investor rights. So it could be a court which is going to review cases on decisions of higher officials, and this is something which Verkhovna Rada as the court of the first instance is dealing now. We have already talked about that this is a temporary solution till some point of time, but yes, I'd like to say that I wish your role, which we have it right now, and the perception of your institution as an example for the judiciary. So I wish you to maintain it, and even despite the challenges which were mentioned today, for all these 4 years. So the society, the parliament, would be able to continue building up a judiciary system in such a way so all the best which was already developed in the course of your activities would be taken into account. And also I'd like to supplement to what Denise has mentioned regarding the dialogue with between the HACC and 2 committees of Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. I wish all of us to elaborate all that necessary amendments to make your activities more efficient, and to achieve that, be a little bit more active in that regard, because the society treats you as a success story. You have proven that you can perform your job efficiently and in a qualitative manner. And it was already mentioned that confiscation of assets is an absolutely new story, and you've managed that. We, as prosecutors institution, we are involved into that activity. We help and support Ministry of Justice with evidence, as we know how the process is organized. But as I say to our prosecutors, we have to maintain a very high level of evidences to bring the case to the success. And every success of the Ministry of Justice we treat as our own success. So if they are not succeeding, we treat that as our fail. We are happy that the Parliament supports the initiatives which can make your work more efficient. And I don't want to follow up on a sad tone, but I have to say that Stanislav Ivanovich has mentioned already that when the war broke out, he thought that there will be so many corruption cases. And that was my thought too. When I worked in the Parliament of Ukraine, and in June of the last year, I started to feel that it appears at a very low level, this corruption in regions which are far from the front line, because there are a lot of a lot of humanitarian aid and financial resources which were not accounted properly. People haven't thought about that, and that corruption actually started appearing. And when I took that position in July, I told publicly that we have two major enemies. This is the aggressor country and all those supporting it, collaborators, and all those supporting it. And internal enemy, this is a corruption, and we have to conquer both of them. Together with the whole anti-corruption vertical, we've started this work very actively, and I'd like to express my gratitude to Mr. Klemenko, the head of SAP, and to NABU director, Mr. Krivanos, because I see that they are very active in their work. We've been starting with Mr. Alexander, and it was like, working on old cases, but then we figured out that we see new cases, we see new problems, and we have to deal with them too. So now the society sees this reaction to all the anti-corruption cases. This is good. Also, the question which was raised by my colleague with the former commissariats, we don't want to do that because we don't have to be dealing with war crimes. We have to combat that specific crimes which we were empowered to. Some people believe that we have to deal with everything, but despite we don't want to deal with such cases, we don't want to do it not because we just don't want to do it because it's not our mandate, but because it's not something we should deal with. But in any case, we have to deal with all corruption cases and acts at each and every level, and in the highest and the middle and the lowest, because the people can see corruption cases at the lowest levels. So our common goal is to eradicate all of them at any of the levels. And I'd like to express my gratitude not only to you, colleagues, judges of the anti-corruption court, but to all the judges from judiciary system and NABU and SAP, and to all other representatives of investigative authorities for all your work and for being engaged into this battle with the corruption, because our task is to explain to those who are still stealing during this wartime, to demonstrate them that they are under the very high risk to be brought accountable. And this risk is much higher than the benefit they will get from what they can receive due to their acts. And again, I'd like to express my gratitude, but first I'd like to mention one thing. I wanted to invite everyone to a broader dialogue inside of the anti-corruption vertical, to a professional dialogue in the judiciary vertical, to a more professional, broader dialogue. But listening to you, colleagues, I figured out that this dialogue is already exists. We have to not only perform our function, we also have to serve to our people, so our people will understand that we take care of every person and every Ukrainian to make their lives better. This is our common goal and this is our common obligation, and together we will be able to reach that goal much quicker. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such an extensive reply. Maybe the audience would have the questions. Can we pass the microphone? Good morning, my name is Tatiana. I'm the journalist from Zerkalo Tizhny newspaper. Journalists have to ask tough questions even during the festive events. Last week, I've been working on an article dedicated to the president's initiative on changing the jurisdiction of NABU. We received a document, namely a table with some changes proposed by the Security Service and Prosecutor General's Office. According to our sources, Mr. Tatarov supervised compilation of this table. For some reason, the document was lost in the labyrinth of a prosecutor's office. I have a question to Mr. Kostin. In your opinion, what is your opinion on this initiative to change jurisdiction? Is it expedient or rather ruining for the system of justice? You, Mr. Maslov, mentioned this initiative at the faction sessions. And also, the same question should be addressed to the Prosecutor General. Do you believe that after the respective draft law is adopted, the institutionality of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office will be considered or taken into account? Thank you very much. Well, look, I'm the head of the Legal Policy Committee. So the criminal code and criminal procedural code are not our cup of tea, and you as a journalist should be knowledgeable. So I cannot discuss this draft law because I have not seen it yet. I even didn't know about its registration, so I don't think it would be professional to raise this topic now. Thank you. Well, you know, your question touches upon both the criminal proceeding sphere and the politics. So I cannot give you an answer on the future development of criminal and procedural law, because your question has a rather political hue, or politicized hue. I think that neither NABU nor SAP can lose even the part of their mandate and their achievements. From my point of view, this draft law offers them an opportunity to increase the efficiency, and we have to support these authorities in an unimpeded way. I can also ponder on the question of the perception. I fully agree with the previous speaker who said that corruption perception is much broader. It goes beyond the legal components you have described, and I really feel it people's perception is quite specific. Let me be quite sincere. Let me give you an example. People believe that the border guards help people to cross the border, receiving bribes for that, and people believe this is corruption, and people do not have the general overview of all legal components. So the authorities, pre-trial investigation authorities, should be involved to counteracting all manifestations of corruption. So as a prosecutor, I think it's my mission. Every authority should receive the opportunity to operate in an efficient manner. That's my objective, that's my task. At the same time, these amendments to the criminal and procedural code should be in line with the criminal policy of the state. On the other hand, these amendments should be supported by the President and the Parliament. And finally, all amendments should be aimed at improving function of all law enforcement system, including the anti-corruption component. So I'd like to use this opportunity to say that any idea deserves discussion. Once we have some information, we should launch an open and professional discussion. When I say we, I mean, of course, the lawmaker. So the lawmaker makes any decision, we should be sure that these decisions are in favor of the country's development. Thank you. Okay. I do not know anything about the table related to the draft law, but I would like to emphasize the following. Perhaps it's a mistake when we focus solely on NABU and SAP, Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. I agree with Mykola, who said that our criminal and procedural code is over-regulated. Let's take, for example, this article number 216. It can be a barrier nowadays to achieving positive results. We can analyze the basic laws on the security service and the police. So we've got 8 laws aimed at fighting corruption. Corruption is an evil phenomenon which can be overcome by joint efforts only. All of us know how many problems we face when the case switches between the jurisdictions. When someone receives the case and says it's not for me, we should refer it to the State Investigative Bureau or NABU. And generally, we should believe it inappropriate when some authority collects evidence and then the case is transferred to another authority that does not recognize the evidence and starts collecting data anew. If the Parliament appoints the Prosecutor General upon the submission of the President, then such Prosecutor General should have enough capacity to initiate investigations. Before war, it was actually the decision of the lawmaker. The prosecutor had an opportunity to form the investigators' groups alongside the vertical. I think this is a good solution. Thank you. I am really sorry we have some limitations of time. My name is Viktor Pankulich. So the judge of the appellate chamber, Mr. Vankulich, had a question. Well, I would like to ask such a question to receive brief and concise answers. As far as I see, there are so many people here, especially the speakers, who have an impact on criminal policy development. Of course, people present in this school are intolerant to corruption. But before I started working as a judge, I was a barrister, and I know situations when the judges in some remote vicinities took a bribe. But sometimes the bribe was like 2,000 hryvnias, was very small, but the sentence was from 5 to 10 years. It's very hard to sign such decisions. As mentioned before, we've been involved in anti-corruption activities since 1995. And of course, we always are talking about increasing the level of punishment. It's very easy to include such sanctions into the criminal case. We can think of everything. We can even include the decapitation or beheading as a punishment. But shall it solve the problem? The punishment should be inevitable, and this should result in changing the mindset, the way of thinking. So let's take the article number 69, which envisages liability for the corruption crimes. Corruption crimes should be punished proportionally. There are graver crimes like homicides and other crimes. In such situation, all factors should be considered, like the person's perpetrator situation, the disease of the perpetrator, and so on. But such factors are not taken into account when you consider the corruption cases. Now I'm appealing to the members of parliament. Of course, we can intensify the punishment, but do not forget about all components of the corruption crimes. Not only the ministers or judges participate in crimes, there are also drivers, auditors, judges, and so on, who are accomplices. The sanction is the same for everyone, but of course we cannot imprison the entire country, or we cannot put all these accomplices to the wall. It's our problem. I'm not going to point fingers, but of course we know about some laws about by their parliament. You know, one of judges was imprisoned for 5 years. It's really sad to see. Some people even die in these prisons on the basis of the corruption in indictment. So please pay attention to sanctions. Please keep this in mind. As far as I understand, it was not your question, it was rather a comment. Well, okay, the question will be as follows. Do you believe that the corruption equals to state treason? The question is about the inevitability of punishment. That's it. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for raising this topic. And I would like to say that the system of sanctions is not based solely on intensification of punishment. There are certain draft laws considering other aspects and broader prospects. We would like to apply the broad range of authorities that are able to investigate corruption crimes. As a prosecutor, I would also like to include other elements of crimes. But this step requires a very fine-tuned and professional communication with the society, because the people's reaction, society's reaction, can be different. To put it frankly, I am for the increased number of elements of crimes that should be included. It can be a really efficient tool to bring the perpetrators to justice. Such processes will enjoy more trust. And let's keep in mind that the system also deals with the victims. So when the state makes an agreement with the perpetrator, the victim shall be entitled to compensation paid by the perpetrator. I'm asking for 1 more minute. I fully agree with your statement about inability to overcome the phenomenon of corruption solely by intensifying the system of law enforcement or system of coercion. We have to get rid of multiple corruption schemes. Due to this step, we will have less corruption violations. Thank you very much, Mr. Prosecutor General. Of course, I can help but take the floor. It's not just about increasing the punishment and broaden the liability. No, we're talking about broad spectrum of the measures, like the law on the liability of judges. Actually, only one article in this law is about judges. All the rest are about the prosecutors, witnesses, and other parties. But now, during war, you should ask Ukrainian people about what should be done to the corrupt persons. Yes, you know the answer. Yes, during the war, it's extremely important to deal with these socially dangerous crimes. You gave us an example of 2,000 hryvnias received as a bribe. But this means that someone did not get a fair decision. Thus, the entire system of justice was compromised. That's why during the war, the liability will be really stringent. That's our position. I think there is a simple answer. The lawmaker introduced some limitations to the corruption articles. This gave rise to multiple problems. If we had discretion and 3 instances, we would be able to solve the problems. We would be guided by the case law. Of course, there are multiple circumstances like disability, disease, and so on. Now, we cannot ask for trust because we do not have the discretion. Please bring back our discretion. Unfortunately, it's time to finish our panel discussion. Time is fugitive, so using this opportunity, I would like to welcome my colleagues with this 4th anniversary. When the patience is over, the endurance starts. I would wish all of you patience and endurance. Many thanks to all the panel discussion participants for your global ideas, your wishes and positive feedback. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Many thanks to our speakers. Please enjoy your coffee break while the speakers are invited to communicate with the media during the
Dear participants, we are going to continue our conference. Please proceed to the hall. We are waiting for you here. Going to continue our second panel on anti-corruption cooperation. I'd like to give the floor to Irina Shiba, UACI Deputy Head. Good morning, everyone. We are starting our last panel discussion on anti-corruption cooperation, and here we don't have the representative of anti-corruption court, which is, even despite being independent, continues to cooperate with all other agencies. And we are going to have this discussion with representatives of Ministry of Justice, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, and others. I know that I will like to ask the following question regarding your personal opinion. How comfort is the work for lawyers who cooperate with the national higher anti-corruption court, whether they working with integrity or not? Frankly speaking, you know, it's an interesting question. Creation of HACC was very interesting for me. First of all, you didn't have to travel all around Ukraine. You can work from home. But secondly, for me personally, it was obvious that the state decided to take only one court and to make it as an example for others. And as of now, in my opinion, it looks actually like that. So what is different for those cooperating with HACC? For me personally, I haven't heard any complaints from other lawyers, my colleagues, regarding the procedural norms or processes application, but often people just don't have to say, they may say that the system is not very efficient, but they don't have any specific examples on the way it was not efficient. Yes, the cassation instance has to check the decisions and judgments of this court, but from my experience, I'd like to say that my cases when two rayon courts didn't want to take on board the case, and for 2 years we were moving around the rayon courts, and then finally the HACC was created and our case was finally considered. So the situation, in my opinion, improved definitely. I don't see any corruption scandals, any evidences or justified statements regarding interests of judges in taking this or that decisions. Some decisions may not be justified, in my opinion, of course, but this is only the question of qualification and consideration on the merits, but these are not the questions which undermine trust to the HCC. In my opinion, HACC, as of now, proved to be trustful, and one of the very important indicators for me are non-guilty decisions. For me, it confirms that the system works right. You've mentioned non-guilty decisions. During the previous panels, our colleagues mentioned that if we go to streets, our citizens will require the perpetrators to be cut off their heads. But let's come back to the reality. It's not possible, of course, in a lawful state. Why actually these no guilty decisions are important and are a good indicator for the system? I think that there are two reasons for that. Our society, first of all, still are not at the level at which it trusts the judiciary. So the society doesn't trust judgments as the documents which are truthful. Even law enforcement agencies, when they are not happy with them, they claim that courts are corrupt and so on and so on. The second reason, and we hear that very often from the law enforcement agencies, are very, so to say, intensive media campaigns. So there is a lot of information about the case, and when the case gets to the court, the society is already waiting for specific decision. That's why the society is not presenting non-guilty decisions good. I know that your company is now preparing cases related to sanctions, which are now under the HACC. What is the practice for these cases? As a lawyer for you, we defend the clients who can get into such cases and can fall under this category. We are now following such cases. The major issue, I will not touch upon this topic, I mean sanctions policy. As a lawyer, I see a lot of problems there. But if you're talking about the consideration of such cases, because we are considering that in the context of HACC, it's not clear to me how these how the fate of Ukrainian co-owners will be considered by this court. Because on one hand, we have a practice when Ukrainians and sanctioned persons should be separate, but there is a different practice that we should confiscate everything and then the state will solve the issue and the case will be considered. I hope that the practice will be more aligned in this regard. The approach to confiscate everything is not correct at its essence, because it can cause problems for the whole system, but nobody doubts that the assets of sanctioned persons should be confiscated. But as regards to investors who are observing integrity and who are not under sanctions, there should be a different approach. The European practice also demonstrates that the compensation should be provided for illegally compensated assets. It's not possible to say to the person that we will confiscate the assets and then we'll see how it goes. No, it's not okay. It shouldn't be like that. For me, it's not clear how the judiciary will move forward. I see that Artem is following the timing. Thank you for that. Let's move forward to our next panelist. I'd like to give the floor to Irina Mudra. I know that your team is actually preparing the documents for motions to the HACC regarding the sanction cases. Can you bring a little bit more light about that? Because we have also viewers online. How many cases have been already submitted? What were the most significant, and what are the plans of the ministry for the future? Thank you, Irina. We have huge plans. The Ministry of Justice of Ukraine, according to the law, is an executive body which should implement the sanctioned policy through the application of sanctions and confiscation of assets for the profit of the country. It is implemented through the motion to the HACC, and I believe that the legislator made it right when decided to give mandate regarding such cases to HACC. We are still in the discussions whether it's the right decision or not, but the practice which we see clearly demonstrates that reasonability and justification of consideration for such cases is obvious. We not always share the opinions of the judges. We are not always agree with the judgments, but this is actually the basis, the foundation of the judiciary, which is necessary for the country where the rule of law prevails. As of now, 29 claims were filed to the HACC. 2 judgments are contested, and 25 decisions are now in force. So we see that the Ministry of Justice is not submitting the claims to the HACC regarding all sanctioned persons. These cases are very difficult. The most famous cases are Yanukovych's case, Mezhigirya, Sokholucha residences, and also properties at Bolonska Naberezhna were confiscated, and a number of cultural goods, paintings, religious books were confiscated. So also 2/3 of Ocean Plaza trade complex was confiscated too. So answering to the comment of Nazar's comment, the rights of Ukrainian investor were not breached. Ukrainian investor remained to be Ukrainian one, and the properties of this investor remained in his hands. But the properties of those who support Russian aggression were confiscated. Deripaska, Zaporizhsky aluminium producer, was confiscated. Also, ferroalloy producer was confiscated because they exported raw materials to Russian military enterprises, and Mykolaiv Linazem factory. Shovko's companies and enterprises, not 100% of companies were confiscated. Why? Because that's actually because of the reason I've already mentioned. Was imported on 100% the Murin enriching factory, 100%. But as to other companies, only a share of such companies was compensated, and the same relates to Saldo assets. 30% of company which owns gas stations in Kherson Oblast, and 40% of a company dealing with touristic services. So the Ministry of Justice applies an approach which takes into account interests of independent investors and those who are not in connection with sanctioned persons and have no relations or connections with Russian companies and do not support Russian aggressions. Now, today, HACC is considering one of the most famous cases, EVH Energy case. 9 companies are respondents, and more than 100 third-party persons. These are companies, natural persons. For 1.5 years of considering of sanction cases, HACC has been proven as an institution which is ready to communicate problematic issues to the society, to broader public, and HACC is open in discussions and provides argumentation to criticism. That is why, as you mentioned correctly, sanction cases are very complicated. Because it is necessary to establish connections and to justify grounds which are foreseen by Article 5 of the law on sanctions. And if it's relatively easy to prove connections, and I'd like to express here my gratitude to law enforcement agency for cooperation. So to prove grounds of acting specifically to do harm to Ukrainian sovereignty, territorial integrity or independence is not an easy task, because we understand that those powerful oligarchs who have their assets abroad would abstain from publicly speak about their position regarding this conflict. So we have to be very careful in finding such cases. Also, it is important to demonstrate the structure of corporate ownership and their relations with other companies. And their connections with companies located at Russian territory and their role in this chain, their strategic and systematic role in financing the defense complex of the Russian Federation, or supporting financially in any other way, for example, by paying taxes to the Russian budget within the thresholds identified in the law. So we have to get into details to understand if it's really important and relevant for Russian economy. There are cases when sanctions are applied to the groups of legal and natural persons, and here we can see a clear structure of business where a political actor of the Russian Federation is a main, so to say, influencer. There is also a person who is responsible for financial support of the group, and also provides security in the criminal world. This is actually referring to the latest case. So the HACC as an arbitrator and the Ministry of Justice, which is collecting and providing information regarding such cases, working together, establishing financial flows, overlapping and reappointing management to different companies, and also heading operation of businesses from our office. So the Ministry of Justice becomes a quasi-institution which is dealing with the preparation of such cases. So, right, the colleagues during the previous panel talked about possible contestation of such cases by the ECHR. Do you see such risks? We believe that such cases can happen in the future. We haven't been preparing for them yet, but when we prepare our claims to HACC, we are also assessing these cases against our possible position in the European Court of Human Rights. But nevertheless, HACC is already following the ECHR practice and taking due diligence in considering and deciding upon the cases. So this is something which is on the way. As of now, that is why we have 25 cases, but not 13,000, as we have numbers, the number of presidential decrees.
Представляє НАЗК, але
Thank you very much. And today we've got also the representative of an SAP, Mr. Sitnik, but we also know him as a former director of NABO. So let me ask you the following question. In what way has the court changed throughout these 4 years, and what is the prospect of future dynamics? Thank you very much for this question. Good afternoon, everyone. Dear HACC judges, dear participants, welcome everyone. So I actually was not for such long time in the office at the time of the court establishment. We did not have any joint meetings, and there were some practices common before the court was set up. Actually, I was a person who did not believe in a real launch of anti-corruption court. I thought that it would never become a reality, but now it's time for us to discuss the 4-year history of HSCC operation. And we can say that these are 4 years of success. However, the situation has dramatically changed since the time of its setup, and we do need some legislative amendments to fit into the current reality. I remember the time when the new legislative initiative was discussed in the parliament, and everyone asked why actually HACC should be involved in a new procedure. But that answer is as simple as because the HACC meets the highest standards. NABU got blocked at the first in the first period of its operation because there were so many cases. At that time, we had to deal with the other courts, with general courts. And I remember a case when a bribe was given to some official for the appointment in NABU itself. But this case could not be considered by the courts for 2 years. But after the HSCC had been established, the verdict was delivered very soon, within just a year, after all 3 instances. Now, I think all those who were skeptical about the HSCC can be satisfied by the pronounced response given by HSCC. Now, the court also deals with the cases related to unjustified assets. Such category of cases was not included into the court's mandate in the initial stage. But now we see how many materials the Ministry of Justice refers to the court. So the unjustified assets cases relate to our citizens who are suspected in illicit enrichment. Of course, this is a big burden for the court, and the court faces with such challenge as procedural overregulation. Nonetheless, the court is deploying its operations because the number of cases is growing. Therefore, definitely we need a law allowing to increase the number of changes, a number of judges. Thus, the court will be able to respond to violations of procedural rights. So now we, as a National Anti-Corruption Authority, NACP, are ready to promote the respective draft laws in the cabinet or in the parliament. As you mentioned, the prevention of procedural rights abuse and unipersonal consideration of cases. So how soon, in your opinion, can we see the respective draft laws registered in the parliament? Well, of course, I would not like to promise what I cannot deliver, so I can say just that I think these draft laws will be registered very soon. At the moment, there are many cases related to the top officials, which are considered in different manner depending on the region. And then we hear such rumors about an SCP prosecuting some particular heads of the regions and so on. I think that especially first instance courts give rise to certain procedural rights abuse, and now we are making just the first steps, and till the reform of judiciary is over, we won't be able to change the attitudes in this legal system. But I think that the Supreme Council will recover after this scandalous case of Knязев. The reform has been launched, but we need time to complete it successfully. We, on our side, are ready to support the draft laws, the legislative initiatives related to unipersonal consideration of cases and prevention of procedural rights violations. I can say that the HACC is able to stick to the highest standards. Thank you very much, Artem. You said that the HSSC continuously suffers from a huge workload due to adding new categories of cases, such as administrative cases. If compared to the initial years of its operation, its jurisdiction has been significantly expanded. But I would ask you, in what way can we prevent the damage done to the core cases considered by the case? I mean the corruption cases, because it's the core activity of the court, and it cannot consider the cases at the expense of the corruption. Well, the only way is to increase the personnel of the court. At the moment, we cannot just forward the administrative protocols to the court because it does not have any physical capacity to consider these cases. We need to launch the respective processes to address the problem, and hope our HACC colleagues will understand and support us in this initiative. As far as we know, the Parliament is going to consider the draft law on restoring declarations, asset declarations. In what way will it be an important event for NABU and SAP and other anti-corruption authorities? Well, we can watch restoration of such processes for an eternity. So this declaration of assets is subject to regular suspensions. The last time was, of course, after the full-scale invasion. In my opinion, Ukrainian legislation on asset declaration is quite ambitious. That's why we observe the attempts to block the enforcement and suspend the asset declarations. At the same time, we've got the law on illicit enrichment. This law is closely connected with the asset declaration. Now we see lots of allegations against the NACP. As I started working in ACP, we started monitoring the lifestyle, and as a result of this function implementation, we could initiate the cases or forward the cases to the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. Once we've got the asset declaration, we can easier and simpler monitor the lifestyle and detect possible violations. In case we are able to confiscate the assets, we will avoid multiple allegations, and we will be able to recover the assets by means of stolen assets confiscation, forfeiture. Thank you very much. I hope that the respective decision on the asset declaration will be made. And now I would like to ask Mr. Klimenko. Alexander, you started working with the HSCC as a detective. Now you're the head of the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. Are you going to participate in the selection procedure to become HSCC member next year? No, I'm not going to do so. It's prohibited by the law. I have no right to apply for the position at HACC. Do you believe that an HACC judge position is still desirable and attractive? Can you, for example, urge other detectives or lawyers to apply for the position at HSCC? Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate HSCC on their anniversary. You have finished this 4-year journey. It was not easy, but it's marked by multiple achievements. Of course, there is still lots of work to do. We know that the workload is increasing. It's increased greatly over the past year. According to our calculations, the increase makes about 35%, and of course, that's not the end of the story. HSCC annually receives more cases than it can consider, and of course the cases will be accumulating. Still, the court works on the cases initiated in 2016, and they are still being considered by the court. In my opinion, we can reduce this burden by selecting more judges. And secondly, it's important to introduce the institute of agreements or deals. In my opinion, this mechanism is not ideal. It simply does not work. As the appellate chamber judge mentioned, it is not possible to use the article number 69 at the moment. However, the mechanism is extremely crucial and essential for the court itself and for the pre-trial investigation authorities. And another way to avoid this overload is not to forward the administrative protocols to the HSCC. In my opinion, it is not a well-balanced decision because it can block the work of the court and distract it from considering serious corruption crimes. In my opinion, the administrative protocols are not as important as the criminal proceedings because the court was intended in the first place to deal with the criminal cases, violations and crimes committed by individual criminals and organized crime organizations that have been stealing our budget for many years. Thank you very much, and with that I would like to hand it over to Semen because we would like to ask you about the legislative initiatives as well. Alexander has mentioned the draft law on the deals, but what are other initiatives which are required for the court to work more efficiently? Thank you very much for this question. Let me first, of course, congratulate the court on this important occasion, the 4th anniversary. I can't help but raise a suspicion in the party of defense by saying that the cooperation with HSC has been extremely efficient. We forwarded them this year 54 cases that exceeds the last year's performance. I believe that this year we are going to reach the value of about 100 cases considered. We are increasing the dynamics. At the same time, we see that the workload for the HSC is, of course, growing. In many cases involve a big number of participants, in particular the defendants, like 7 or 8 or even 10 defendants in the same case. Of course, these cases are forwarded to the court only after the concerted efforts by NABU and SAP, and together we are increasing our investigative capacity by hiring more detectives. That's why we agree that the number of judges should be increased. We do not need any legislative changes. A simple governmental decision will be enough. Of course, I'm not going to dwell on this for a long time, because here we see the top representatives of the judiciary who can confirm my words. During our most recent visit to the US, we were impressed by the meeting with a judge of the US system who said that 95% of criminal cases end up with a deal. That's an incredible achievement. That's a great relief for the judiciary. And by the way, they handle extremely notorious cases that enjoy attention from the society. I cannot give you any particular examples at the moment, but believe me that on the basis of our case law, we can say that such an institute, such a mechanism is highly on demand. Many thanks for the cooperation. Together we can foster both positive changes and prevent negative changes. I don't know what is more important, promotion or prevention. I think that these two things go hand in hand. The anti-corruption authorities and law enforcers and lawyers, international experts and partners can make their contribution. Okay, I can't help but ask about the new legislative initiative on equalizing the corruption to the state treason. So the question is, what is your opinion on this initiative? Can it maybe have some negative aspects? Well, generally, the anti-corruption infrastructure is founded on such a premise that NABU jurisdiction should remain as it used to be in the very beginning. Alexander, Nazar, and Artem would like to comment on this question.
I fully support that any intervention into our accountability can breach our independence. So I would support the thoughts of my colleague. That was already a long time ago, 2015. I've heard about that already. So the fight with the accountability was already implemented. There were tries to implement it. So there were options who should do that and why. There were even reasons and grounds for that. So the Article 536, which prohibits to transfer such cases, allows for the independence of respective institutions. And at that time, the department, which was called Kononenko-Granovsky department at the time, was producing clone cases to make investigations more complex. Even then, back then, when this norm already existed in 2015. So we already seen that, and it wasn't a good practice. So there was also an incident of a fight between the NABU and General Prosecutor's Office. That's not a new idea. That's an idea which exists as long as anti-corruption legislation. Every iteration of our higher officials try to do everything possible to control the investigations on anti-corruption cases. When I hear about exclusivity, I usually recall the courtroom and the claims on inadmissibility of evidences. But, on public events, we always listen about exclusive accountability. I believe that there should be a unified approach. And I will agree with all previous speakers that even if we have it, we still see the fights between different institutions. So the existence of such norms on jurisdiction cannot solve this problem. Maybe we have to think about the essence, even the necessity of existence of such term as exclusive jurisdiction. Because that's absolutely inadequate when we may face that the legislative amendments wouldn't change the situation at all. In any case, we have to avoid fighting for power. And unfortunately, in my opinion, personal opinion, I think that if there is a political will in the state to ensure the continuous operation of anti-corruption institutions, it will take place. But any other amendments to the legislation will not help. Thank you, Nasar. Now I'd like to give a floor to the audience to ask questions to our panelists. You are welcome to ask any questions. Do you have any questions to our panelists? Yes, please. Dear colleagues, please kindly help with the microphones. Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Great. I'm very grateful to the panelists and to the organizers, and I would like to congratulate the HACC with 4 years anniversary. We have a problem in Ukraine with executing the judgments, and any doubt in public authorities and judgments of the courts is actually lies in their execution. So looking at this problem, it's often related with the cases where some assets should be arrested or some funds should be collected. So looking in the context of sanction cases, should it be necessary to apply some more flexible tool which will help to follow the execution of these judgments? Great, thank you for your question, Irina. Over to you. Thank you for your question. As to the execution of judgments of the HACC, especially related to the sanctions, this issue actually is already regulated by the law. After the judgment is in force, it is then sent to the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, and then the subject which is going to manage the confiscated properties and assets will be defined. So for 70% of such judgments, such managers are already identified, and then, like usually, the state's property fund is such an entity, and then this fund is responsible for managing these assets, maybe like in different ways, but to create judicial control over what? Over decisions of the government, that will be weird. Agree with me. What else? What should be the next step with the assets? Have they influenced the situation, or were they used for the prosperity of the government and the state? That is another question, and for that we have to hear the position of the state property fund, because this fund can bring more light to that issue and to demonstrate the efficiency of the management. May I add a few words regarding this issue? This story with non-executing judgments is an old story, and I believe that it will be not correct to discuss it. Why? Because the state has the full-fledged process for anti-corruption issues and cases and judgments. And to implement this judicial control, it will be necessary to provide also a mandate for the judges, for the courts, and also the responsibility for the judges for fulfilling and non-fulfilling this control. And that entails that the judge has to go much farther in terms of its mandate. But I think that first of all, as to the HACC, first of all, the judges should decide the cases, and then the state should ensure their full execution. Let's move forward to the next question. I have not rather a question, but rather a comment. This legislative initiative on treating the corruption as a state treason was discussed, and colleagues, I think, miss one important aspect. For example, if a single judge considers a case, in this situation it would be a simplification. We have to take into account that treason cases are the cases which are actually a priori should be considered with the presence of jury. So if you're talking about cases which are treated the same way as state treatment, first of all, we should talk not about the consideration of the cases, but about the punishment. Nevertheless, it's a complication. These are severely difficult cases, and the society should discuss this issue broader. Thank you very much for your comment. Do we have any questions from the audience? Thank you very much, Vadim Valko. After Maidan Corruption Prevention Center, I will have a following question to the head of Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office and to Nabu as to the sub-question. When the court is so when the judgment is being published and decided, how the sub is working on taking into custody to avoid situation when suspects or perpetrators escape, because this is a real problem and a major one which is systematically was present during all 4 years of existence of HACC. Another question relates to the number of assets which are published in NABU's reports. Because we see these reports for last year, we have huge numbers. Almost 2 billion hryvnias were transferred to the army of Ukraine. This is a very good argument to those who claim that we spent a lot of money to combat corruption, but no economic effect of such activity is present. Actually, this is a very good example of that. How can we counterclaim them? But unfortunately, nobody knows what exactly from that confiscated assets was transferred to the state, and do you investigate such issues, and do you follow up such information? It's an old practice. We've been working on that issue in 2021 already. We've been analyzing this information and elaborating issues. So now the prosecutors file motions on taking into custody before the case is considered in the courts. So that was an old practice, what you referred to. As to the calculations, we calculate what we have at our stage, but unfortunately we don't have any information on the amounts which were received after selling or renting or managing. So we just didn't have this information, unfortunately. Thank you, colleagues. Are there any more questions? Yes, Tatiana, please, one more question, and then we will proceed to closing remarks. Thank you very much. I will use this opportunity if we have no other questions. So this question will relate to the representatives of anti-corruption infrastructure, and it will relate to the question which I already asked to Mr. Vadim. If we are talking about money, the major activity is to return assets to Ukraine, and this situation with this issue is rather not very positive. So we've seen the development of this tool of assets collection. And could you tell me, please, we have no positive cases regarding illegal enrichment, and this is because of different reasons related to criminal guarantees. In many countries, there is no such limitation, no such lower threshold for civil confiscation as 8 million hryvnias in our case. What do you think about eliminating this threshold of 8 million hryvnias, and how can it positively or negatively affect the practice of collecting assets and confiscating assets, and maybe it may also demonstrate some positive trend? Yes, you're absolutely right. The burden of proof is on the defendant. In that cases, as to illegal enrichment, we didn't have such cases. Why? Because the article was amended just recently, but pre-court investigations are ongoing in this regard. As to the eliminating or raising the threshold, I'm not ready to answer that question, but I may say that the compulsory collection through the court proceedings is a very efficient tool comparing to going through the path of illegal enrichment. And it also can become a tool for abuse. So we may see cases when one asset could be a subject of two different proceedings, when the prosecutor's office claims its collection for the prosperity, for the benefit of the state, and then the third party claims that this asset should be collected in his or her favor. So that could cause additional troubles. We are interested in the most efficient way of operation of HACC, and we are interested in streamlining the consideration of cases. I'm very grateful to our panelists and to the representatives of civil society, because they were very active in the creation of the whole anti-corruption infrastructure, and they are still active in demanding more. So, following up this panel, I'd like to ask the last question to all the panelists. It will be a single question in Blitz format. Could you please name the most important achievement of the HACC, and what are the challenges for the HACC for the next years? Semen, over to you. Maintaining and strengthening the independence. This is an achievement and a challenge at the same time. Ensuring justice while considering cases. It's difficult not to agree with this, Semen. Yes, this is both achievement and a challenge. It relates to all the judiciary institutions. As to the collection of sanctioned assets, this is a powerful, titanic work on establishment and new legal grounds and law enforcement in our country. And I would wish to the judges, I really deeply honor for all their work they do, to be patient, to be resilient, to be stable, to avoid burnout, and to do everything according to the rule of law. Thank you very much for that. I would agree with Semen. This is both an achievement and a challenge. In my opinion, no one in Ukrainian power wants to have an independent institution fighting corruption. So this direction of work would be the challenge for any public authorities. And another issue is a huge load because we would avoid the situation when HACC would be able to deal with all that load. Thank you, colleagues. I'd like to take this opportunity and to express my gratitude to HACC judges for all that achievements we can all be proud of. And as to the challenges ahead of us, I'm sure that European Union Anti-Corruption Initiative will help you with them, and I hope that the next year we will gather again with more judges, with more people, with more experts, with more staff members of the court. Thank you very much. This is the end of this panel.
Дякую. Dear participants, dear panelists, thank you very much for your active participation. And now I would like to hand it over to Ms. Vera Mikhailenko, the head of the High Anti-Corruption Court. Above all, I would like to thank you sincerely for celebrating the 4th anniversary of the High Anti-Corruption Court's activity. Actually, we had some doubts whether we should really celebrate this occasion because it's the war, it's not such a long period of activity, there are lots of problems and so on and so on. However, even small victories should be celebrated. That's the reality. So we have to share our achievements, our success, our challenges as well. It's a small victory, I think. Many thanks to everyone for joining our festivities. Thank you for contributing your time and your soul to this event. I would like also to congratulate the judges on this occasion. I wish you inspiration, wisdom, and victory, of course. Thank you, everyone.